Okay, so what we're going to work on right now is sewing a French seam in the chiffon fabric. So I have my block C pieces. I have them just pinned together on one long side, so I'm going to stitch along this edge. Our seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, but since it's a French seam, we're going to sew it in 2 steps. So my first stitch is going to be at 1/4 inch. So I'm going to take this over here, line this up. You can use pins if you like. Just make sure that you're careful and accurate. The back stitch at the front, beginning. A 1/4 inch all the way down. And I'll back stitch at this end as well. Don't go all the way to the end and bunch it all up. Alright. So now we have this stitch here. So the next step is I need to press this open, and then we'll go to the next phase. Alright, so I've pressed this open. What I did to press it is I first pressed the seam allowance open, like that, and then I pressed it back this way. Because the next step is to stitch along this edge so that this clean finish is to the inside. Now before we do that, we want to trim down this seam allowance to make sure it doesn't accidentally get caught and these little fuzzies stick out the edge of the garment on the front side. So I'm going to carefully cut this down to kind of a fat 1/8 of an inch, very carefully so that you're only cutting the seam allowance. Make sure you have a very nice sharp scissors to do this. And that way this will get encased in the seam and there won't be any raw edges in the garment. Okay, so we'll get that out of the way. Now we'll fold this back. So now we'll stitch along this edge. Line my fabric up. So now on this edge that's finished, clean finished, we have the seam allowance to the inside. We have this clean pressed edge here. We're going to use that and stitch at a 1/4 inch here. So the first stitch was at a 1/4 inch, the second stitch is also at a 1/4 inch, so that added together is our 1/2 inch seam allowance. There's a back stitch here. So now when we open this, we have a clean finish here. On both the inside edge is clean finished, and then this is our seam to the outside. So I'm going to press this and then we can see exactly what it's going to look like finished. So this is the finished French seam. So we have, this is the outside edge. You can see there's no thread sticking through or anything like that, any frayed edges. On the back side we have a very nicely clean finished seam here, and it's pressed to one side. So that's the completed French seam. The other important thing to note is it's nice and even, because in a sheer material you're going to be able to see that seam from the front side. So you want to make sure you're very accurate so that this seam allowance doesn't become very wobbly and uneven.